Okay, so in your packet, we're going to do task number 19. Some highway patrol officers use this formula to predict or sometimes analyze stopping distance, D for speeds, S. For the following equations, find the solution, explain what it says about the stopping distance. I did A with you. I'm going to do B with you today. So what this says is S is the speed. And if you will notice, it's already substituted something in for this D. So they took this equation and wrote it here. And then instead of D, they replaced it with 95. So what that tells me automatically is that the distance is 95. All right, so how do you solve this problem? You know you can do this in the calculator, but in the quadratic formula, you would do, I have to set this equal to 0 to use the quadratic formula. I know I need to use the quadratic formula because I have decimals and I have two S terms, an S squared and an S. So I would set that equal to 0 by subtracting 95. So I would have 0.05 S squared plus 1.1 S minus 95. Okay, and then to do this process, you would do the quadratic formula. So the opposite of the B, plus or minus B squared minus 4AC over 2 times 0.05. Okay, and then in your calculator you would do this. Now I'm not going to put this in the calculator because we've practiced this together, but you would need to do the negative 1.1 plus the square root and get that number and then divide it by this number. Remember to hit enter right here and then divide by this. And then you would do the same thing, but you would do a minus. So in those instances, again, I did A with you, so you get a positive and a negative possibly. So then you have to interpret. Does negative make sense? Well, the speed in this case is what we're solving for. Does it make sense to have a negative speed? No, not really, so you'd kick that out. So let's just say that your answer when you solve that quadratic, you got 54. So that would mean S equals 54 when D equals 95. So that means my speed was 54 and my distance would have been 95 for a stopping distance. So if I'm going 54 units per whatever, it would take 95 feet to stop, or whatever the unit is. And that's how these are different, because it's put something in for the S and it's asking you to solve for D. So interpret that in the problems. All right, the next one, the height of a football in feet kicked from the ground level in seconds can be estimated by this. Write and solve an equation to show when the football hits the ground at the end of its flight. So if it hits the ground, you would know that H equals 0. So you could plug 0 in for H and solve for the time, and that would tell you when it hits the ground. All right, regulation for high school, NCAA, and NFL require the goalpost to be 10 feet above the ground. At what time is the ball 10 feet or higher above the ground? So if it says 10 feet or higher, you want to put 10 feet in for the height and solve for T. So you would subtract the T, and then you could use the quadratic formula. Subtract the 10, sorry. And then this one is a little bit tricky because A would be the negative 16, so just be careful. It's in front of the T squared. B would be the 35, and C would be the negative 10. You would solve for that, and that would give you the 2 times where it's 10 feet. Reread the question. It says, at what times is it higher than 10 feet? Okay. All right, number 20. I did these with you. Make sure to show all work so people can follow. We're not going to do with tables and graphs. We're just going to solve. So this one has one single x term that I see. So I would add 2, divide by 3, and take the square root. So adding 2 and dividing by 3 would give me 9. Okay, so I would have x minus 4 squared equals 9, and then I would take the square root. Remember, when you take the square root, you do the positive and the negative. So you'd have equals plus or minus the square root. That would be 3, and then you would add 4 to that. So you have two answers here, the positive one and the negative one. Okay, this one is set equal to 0. They're factors, so you would just set each equal to 0 and solve. Solve for x, and you're done. Draw, if possible, a quadratic function that has 0 roots. All right, I'm not going to do these with you, but I'm going to show you what you have to do. A quadratic function would look like this, or would look like this. That's the only two things you can draw. On your graph, a root means that it crosses the x-axis. So if it had 0 roots, it would not cross the x-axis. So where could you draw a quadratic function on a coordinate plane and have 0 roots? And you'll have to figure that out. Where could you just have one single one? So maybe it's just that one, taking out those two. And how could you draw it if you have 2? So that's what those should consist of. The only two things you can draw is an upside down U or a U. That's it. Nothing else. All right, and the last ones. Graph each system by hand. We're not going to do that. All I need to know is where these cross. So you can do these in the calculator if you want to. You can put this in Y1 and this in Y2 and find intersection points. At this point, it's going to be easy for some of you to do this. If y equals y, y is the same thing here and here. You can do x squared plus 1, which is y, would equal the 4x plus 1. Then solve. So since I have an x squared and an x, I have to get everything to one side. So I'm going to subtract 4x, and I'm going to subtract 1. If I subtract 1 from both sides, it goes to 0. So now I have this to solve. And to solve this, I can factor or use the quadratic formula. This one does factor. And then I can solve. Set x equal to 0, x minus 4 equal to 0, and solve for x here. You got your answers. The thing with number 2, it's almost like number 1. Oh, I'm sorry, you don't have your answers here. You have to find the ordered pairs where they cross. So x equals 0 is 1 and x equals 4 is 1. Sorry. So to find the ordered pair, you would plug 0 back in for x. So you'd have y equals 0 squared plus 1. Y equals 1. So one of your answers is 0, 1. And then you would put 4 in for x and solve. So when you put 4 in, you got 17. These two things are your answers. Now notice I just put these things into one of them. I could put them in either one. Either way, I'm going to get the same thing. So I could have put it down here. It would have just gave me the same answer. Number 2 is almost identical to this, but you have to solve for y first. So you would add x to the right side. And now you can set that equal to this and solve. You can factor or use the quadratic formula. Same thing with these down here. They're all set equal to y, so you could do 4x squared equals negative 3. Solve that. Find where they cross. They may not cross. Okay. Then this one set as equal to 0. Solve for x. Again, when you get the x value, plug it back in to get the y. I hope that helps you finish your packet.